that my dog?
No, that's mine.
I was wondering.
They've decided that either the devil or a rabbit is in the garden.
Hello there, my name is Simon Godfrey and welcome back to the Tribe of Names YouTube channel. On bass is Tom Hyatt.
Evening.
On guitar is Carl Eisenhart.
Hello.
And on drums is Scott Miller.
Hi.
And backed by public demand, we had such a good response from the last one where we were talking about Rush during the 80s. So we are now taking this a step back, if you will, by talking about Rush during the 70s and early 80s. So I think we're talking, guys, 74 to 81?
It's a good span.
Okay, fair enough.
Thorough.
Yeah. But before we get into that, I would strongly suggest if you haven't already subscribed to the channel, please consider it. It really does help us, especially clicking on the like button. And if you really do want to be kept notified of future videos, just click on the bell icon and you'll get a little ding as soon as we actually release new content. So with all of that out the way, who would like to start off? Are we going to do what we did last time and go from back to front or front to back?
That's a loaded question. Let's go.
What kind of video are we making here?
Let's go front, the kind that's going to get hits. Engagement will be short, but it'll be hit. I say we go chronologically. Let's start from the...
Okay.
All
right. So who's got the earliest album then?
I think I have Caress of Steel.
Carl, you have the floor.
I thought about this long and hard. The reason I picked Caress of Steel, it's the album that arguably I think I heard members of Rush say a few times they were not pleased with that one, and it didn't really achieve the critical acclaim of the one before it and the one after it or any of the ones after it. But to me, that album was the jumping off point for their real burst of creativity. If you listen to the first album, they're young, they're a really, really good young band. Songwriting is pretty good, but very reminiscent of other bands that you've heard. Great songs, love that album, but I only love it as part of the Rush catalog, probably not by itself. Fly By Night, they really started to hit a stride. All of a sudden, the songwriting got a lot more interesting, bringing in acoustic instruments and, doing a lot of, By-Tor and the Snow Dog, kind of a longer piece. But then they hit Caress of Steel, and that's where they really took the left turn creatively. Particularly for my own interests, Alex Lifeson makes this gigantic leap forward as a guitar player between Fly By Night and Caress of Steel. I've said this before, I learned how to play guitar by learning Rush songs in chronological order. And as a 12-year-old novice guitar player, I could play anything on the first album, most of the stuff on the second album, okay. And all of a sudden it got to Caress of Steel, and I'm like, what's happening here? And I had to work and push myself forward to learn how to play these intricate tunes. And also at that time of my life, 12 years old, those lyrics, life is but a candle and a dream must give it flame. That sounds cheesy now. When you're 12, that's like food. Man, I lost my mind when I read the lyrics to that album. The whole I think I'm going bald thing didn't really hit me for a couple of years after that, but that one kind of personal. Yeah, I mean, there's a technicality to the music that sort of popped up. Maybe, Fountain of Lamneth at time gets a little wandery out there, but I love it. Just I was thinking about this early today and I didn't get all the way through it in my head. I'm almost positive I could still play every note of Fountain of Lamneth.
Wow.
Right down. Haven't done it in 25 years, but I remember it pretty well.
Pick up your guitar right now.
about the
Well, there goes our copyright infringement.
I
for
was
this
going to say,
episode.
yeah.
and this is the guitar that I learned every single one of those songs
Oh
on.
wow!
I just realized that this was my dad's Fender F14 acoustic.
Wow.
And
Wow.
I stole it from him. He just never saw it again.
Go
That
ahead.
was a tough album for them. That was the all of that, not all of it, but most of the earlier Rush catalog is admittedly lost on me. In my history with it, I went back and got to cherry pick, what I enjoy out of the earlier material. So I was doing a little bit of reading, and that was the one that they used for Caress of Steel, the tour. They had referred to that as the Down the Tubes tour, because they thought that was it. Like, people weren't showing up for the shows, they weren't making their money, and their label was upset with them. So they thought, this is it,
I think that period also marks like the very short time where Rush was just straight three-piece, guitar, bass, and drums, and vocals. And, keyboards weren't really so dominant on their albums at all, other than maybe the beginning of 2112 or maybe some little drops here and there. But for the most part, the keyboards were out of the picture, and they were just like a straight garage prog band. Or that's what I like to call it, garage prog, just straight, loud three-piece.
Yeah, the view was narrow. The orchestration was still really straightforward.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
But even with that, I mean, the variety, you don't necessarily notice that. You're absolutely correct. I don't think there are any keyboards on it at all. But you don't notice that it's guitar, bass, and drums because they orchestrated everything so carefully.
Simon, any thoughts for you?
I think it was the last album, I suppose you could say, where they went unnoticed by the greater world, I suppose is the best way to describe it. Their moment really of emergence was 2112. So these guys were still doing support slots for bigger bands, doing their own tours. And as you say, Scott, with the Going Down the Tubes tour, this was an album which they were, I know that I've read about this, that at the time they were incredibly emotionally invested in, and didn't feel as though it got the reaction that they hoped it would. Now, I don't know this album anywhere near as much as some of the other ones, but I will say that Bastille Day is as strong an opening track as anything that they've.
Oh yeah.
Lyrically, again, I'm not a huge Tolkien fan, but if anything ever was going to make me be a Tolkien fan, it was, the imagery in the Necromancer, which, that kind of this just sort of pulled me in that direction. And I tried to read those books and just get there.
It's for me that always turns me off from J.R.R. Tolkien are the show tunes.
Yes.
Exactly.
Singular sensation.
You got the ring. You got the ring. You got the ring. The ring. No,
don't look at the eye. Don't look at the eye. That eye of sorrow.
But I think really you're quite right that I think lyrically you could see some kind of breakthrough was happening, certainly when it came to Peart's writing. And I think that there's a lot of similarity here, in my opinion, to Pink Floyd when they released Meddle and then they released Dark Side of the Moon. You could see all of the fixings for 2112 coming gradually into focus on this album.
I'm going to go close my door so that my dogs will leave us alone.
Okay. I just had this vision of Carl shooting across the screen with a dog in his throat.
They have now moved to directly above my head.
Okay. So yeah, one of the things that always, and it's not related to any album per se, but the interesting dynamic of Neil writing their lyrics, and of course Geddy would have the final say. He's not going to sing something that he just can't stand behind or believe in. But it's such an interesting dynamic, to be the front man and have Neil writing the lyrics. You know, it's commonplace with people that perform other people's songs, but you know, as an original band, like it blows my mind how they operated that way.
Again, if you read through the lyrics on the first album, they were pretty smart to give that job to Neil.
Yeah, I love
Well,
watching.
hey now, baby. I said I like your style. I was 12 years old going, really? That's what they're gonna write?
In one of the retrospectives, they talk about, you know, when they picked up Neil, and you know, he was always reading his books, you know, and they were like, that guy's gonna write the lyrics. That's gonna be him. He's the right one for it.
It's interesting, like, you know, a lot of things we make fun of in prog lyrically was started by bands like Rush and Genesis. But the thing is back then, you know, you can say anything you want about Caress of Steel. Nobody did an album like that. I wasn't a fan of Rush in the 70s, but I was listening to bands like Kansas and Emerson, Lake and Palmer. You know, even Zeppelin, and just hearing, like you said, the Tolkien references, the just the expanded imagination of what lyrics could be. Like back then, that really blew me away. Like, what was Carry On Wayward Son about? You know, so back to Rush. I think we were going chronologically ascending.
Yeah,
Chronologically, I am here to present the be all end all of Rush albums. Sorry, all others pale in comparison. Nah, it's 2112, man. 2112. It's the quintessential album.
And
it remains top 10 albums for me all time. You know, it's the one I've listened to the most. It's got everything, man. You know, it's the killer drum fills, great solos. I've got it. I actually queued it up. I don't know if you guys can see this here. Can you see that?
Oh wow!
That's the Rush 2112 box set. Yeah.
Do you have the hologram on the vinyl?
Yeah. It's cool. Very cool. I mean, you know, this album's been picked apart by so many people. There's not, you know, it's like that Dave Chappelle skit, you know, what more can I say about Charlie Murphy that hasn't already been said? You know, what can you say about 2112 that hasn't been said? You know, it's an awesome record. I don't want to say saved their career, but you know, it's the album that they put out that, you know, put them on the map.
And it was the album heard around the world, you know?
Yeah.
I think that album not only changed their career, I gotta say, like, I can remember where I was when I heard that album, and I think that album changes every musician who hears it. I really do. I think the way that album starts, the way just what's the word? The continuity, I guess, of it. There's once again, the lyrics were out of nowhere. You know, Ayn Rand. Who was writing lyrics about Ayn Rand? Who would do it now? But anyway, but
doesn't age well.
The way that album goes, obviously side one, it was just life-changing, I think, for anybody who has heard it, as a Rush fan or just any music fan.
Yeah. Come on.
That's the first time I heard it too, was on the Signals tour, and everybody's going, hey, and I was like, all right, I don't know this yet, but I know it's a new favorite.
Yeah, definitely.
There is one thing I will make mention about, not only obviously 2112 being a watershed moment for the band, but I think that you could hold it up as an example of one of the bravest albums ever made. If you consider the circumstances under which they recorded it, where they knew that if they didn't produce something that was going to sell, this was their last go. And rather than kowtowing and being timid and trying to find something which pleased the record company and pleased the record buying public, they went, screw it. We are going to make the record we want to make. And if it's our last record, we can then at least point to it and say we had the character and integrity to write it. Now, unfortunately, they wove a whole load of Ayn Rand bullshit into it. But the bottom line here is that if you can find it in your heart to disassociate that element of it, I think that as an album, it is one of the records that I hold up as a sort of like a signpost to what it means to have some kind of musical integrity. And speaking of bravery, can we talk a little bit about kimonos at this point?
Brave fashion choices.
Yeah,
It's another thing I learned from Rush. Don't dress like them.
Don't dress like them at all. Yeah.
you know it.
It
And
could be put on a camel toe calendar.
it's so important to learn from other people's mistakes and not have to learn them yourself.
Yep, exactly.
Thank you guys for doing
They're
that.
an example of what to do and what not to do.
There was probably a brief moment where I was at serious kimono risk, but I thought better of it.
What do you like? What was Chevy Chase's character in Caddyshack?
Oh my God.
He's like, who decorated this place? Benihana?
Yeah.
So, is
Yeah,
there
I love
anything more at all to be spoken about with regards to this?
No.
you got it.
What else can you say about
That's
it,
the
man?
thing.
It's
Unfortunately, it's
They're-
been talked to death. I mean, there've been what two or three retrospectives of Rush's career that spend most of their time and behind the music. So people have heard it.
yeah.
And thank God they've heard it because it's an amazing thing. But
It's one of the albums I'm going to listen to until I'm not able to listen to music anymore. You know what I mean? It's always going to be there. It's a good friend, this album.
Yeah. And it's also a reminder of what an event an album can be. Like back when you were buying vinyl and opening the gatefolds and everything and reading the lyrics. You know, 2112 is a classic example of that right there. So I think we have next in the chronology, I believe it actually is chronologically is Farewell to Kings.
Simon, you're up. Okay. Yeah. A Farewell to Kings is, in my opinion, one of the albums which sits rather strangely in the hearts of a lot of Rush fans, because it's so much of that material still figured into the set of Rush later in their years, and yet it hardly ever gets mentioned as an album. And I will be honest with you that in a lot of ways, as I chose during the last episode, Hold Your Fire, the reason why I chose A Farewell to Kings is because that was an enormously influential album upon me, because it was the very first progressive rock album I ever listened to. I heard it in 1979, I think it was. So it was only a couple of years after it had been released, and the first thing that hit me on this was I absolutely love the music. I absolutely hate the singer. At the time, I was 14, I think, maybe 13, I don't know. And the idea of this really high singing, and at this point, I'd already heard Led Zeppelin, and I never really drew that line between the two of them and called that emotional immaturity or musical naivety, but I didn't see that. But I think had I not listened to that album, I would not have investigated any more progressive rock, and I would not be a fan of prog and a writer of the same kind of music these days. And I think that it literally does come down to the track Xanadu. I think if you look at Xanadu as a song, it has absolutely every aspect of progressive rock that people expect out of it. It has low Taurus pedals. It has lots of classical instrumentation courtesy of Neil at the back, with tubular bells and crotales and wind chimes and wood blocks and all of this. And double neck guitars and Moog synthesizers. I mean, it really is. If you wrote down as a list of what progressive rock had, it would be Xanadu, as far as and of course, it had the one thing which, for me, really took me by surprise, which is so many fucking sections.
Yeah.
This just like it just constantly changed and changed and changed, and I didn't get it until later on. But it just had so many sections, and I thought, what the hell is happening here? And then they slap you in the face with the refrains,
Yeah.
and you go, that was from earlier. That was from earlier. And they weren't using them as choruses. They were using them as refrains. They were using them as scenes. It was the first cinematic piece of music I think I'd ever heard outside music written for cinema, you know, and I just could not get it. And then they get to this end section, and Alex Lifeson does this solo of solos at the end of Xanadu, which just, it has all of this triumphantness, but this lamenting blues undertone all the way through it. And then they finish off with these arpeggios, two guitars playing arpeggios, and wind chimes and wood blocks and all the other bits at the end. And then they just round it out with this cacophony at the end. And then they finish like a classical piece, and that's the end of side one. Like we're not finished with you yet.
Yeah.
We're taking you into a black hole soon, dude. Strap in.
Yeah,
And
right.
therein, I think, is the reason why I think Rush is still so close to my heart, because, and we'll get to that track in a second.
It's on the next side.
Yeah, and I think that's when you get those moments in music which root you to the floor, and you have no idea what's going on, and you're loving it. In those 11 minutes and 5 seconds, I became a Rush fan, and was never ever going to not be a Rush fan. And if they'd have stopped there and then, they would have made a contribution to my life.
I think if I was Alex Lifeson and I wrote that beginning, sorry, I can't sing it, but
no, I'm enjoying it.
yeah,
You're doing a great
Carl,
job.
get your guitar.
But I just like the fact, if I was Alex Lifeson, the fact that I just wrote that riff would just be something I could end my career on. That riff is so incredibly powerful, and just the way it brings in the song and holds itself in while the hits are coming in, and that's another one that's solidified with me too.
Yeah.
Everybody send 25 cents to Carl's Patreon account.
Yes.
There you go.
But then I also want to talk to you about the first song on the second side is a track called Closer to the Heart. And I know that there are people that aren't particularly fans of it over here, but I can tell you there are two things which make it very special to me. One, it was a hit in the UK.
Yeah.
And this is not something which I don't think was a hit over here in the US. But
I don't think it was until later.
Yeah, it was a hit. It charted. But I think that it really wasn't a case of prescience on behalf of the UK audience, although they took to them at that moment. It was just the fact that that was where they burst through. It was where the bubble burst, and they made it out into the world. Basically, I think they were just too good at that point not to be, not to reach across more than one ocean, really. And it was that track, and also sitting in my archive somewhere back on that shelf behind me is me in my very first band as I was 19, with me on drums and all of my mates playing Closer to the Heart, an awful rendition of it. I mean, it sounded, you have to put that horse down. It was absolutely, it's abominable, but it was, the very first thing we chose to cover was Closer to the Heart.
It's a great
Yeah.
song. But
It's a great song.
not
I
my
love the
favorite,
song.
but it's still a great song.
I'm not sure I've ever heard anybody that wasn't an actual Rush tribute band do a great version of that song.
Yeah.
Because
yeah.
there's a little bit more to it. I mean, it's a 3-chord song, no two ways about it. But there's a delicacy to it that a bar band just isn't going to get. And then there's the vocal problem.
The vocals.
Oh yeah, I can sing that. You can't
Just-
really. I mean,
Twist the
just
voice. Yeah, it's a great song. And if I'm not mistaken, I don't know if we're going to continue through the track listing, but going back to instrumentation and orchestration, this is the album where they really opened up with everything, isn't it?
Yeah.
absolutely.
I mean, talking
Yeah.
about like all of Neil's percussion, like you said, the Moog synth, just the Taurus pedals, all this stuff. Like this was really the floodgates for that, wasn't it?
Musical innovation too. Look at Cygnus X1. Nobody ever did anything like that. That's never been done since. It's
I
just
think that-
crazy.
Yeah, I think there's a case to be made that that was the moment where prog metal sort of like was starting to poke through.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I agree.
they kind of started it up with 2112, and that's where they took it to the next level. And it, I've always looked at Cygnus X1 as a sci-fi movie in 10 minutes.
Yeah. And just the first time hearing that, whatever the hell they used to make those sounds, and then suddenly Neil, that you're not expecting that the first time you hear it, and it's just like Satan's head comes out of space and tells you a story.
Yeah,
But geez, I mean, hearing that the first 500 times, I'm just so floored. Like there was nothing like that ever since from Rush, I don't think. Well,
It's certainly one of the darkest tracks that they've ever written.
oh
definitely.
yeah.
Definitely.
Other than I think I'm going bald.
yeah,
It's pretty freaking bleak.
There's a,
And there's not a bad tune. I mean, other than my opinion of Closer to Heart, but there's not a bad tune on that album. Madrigal, Cinderella Man. I mean, I could go on for hours, but they're all lyrically, they're fantastic. It's funny, Cinderella Man sort of flies in the face of the whole Ayn Rand thing. It was about being charitable.
yeah.
And Madrigal was a little maybe too, I guess, Canterbury, but still just, it was a beautiful song. It was a beautiful ballad.
It breaks the thing up because it overall, if you like, aside from Closer to the Heart and Madrigal, it's a really dark album.
Yeah.
And those two kind of pick it up a little bit so that it doesn't weigh down on you quite as much.
and
Right,
let's not forget that it has again a really great opener in the title track. I mean, how many albums do you know open up with the title track? They normally save that to the last, but they just throw it all out on the field, right? This is what we can do.
Yeah.
And talk
Yeah.
about the 1-2 punch. This is where the 1-2 punch begins.
Yes.
Farewell to Kings and Xanadu.
Xanadu, yeah.
No. Oh, look, there's the first 16 minutes of your album.
Yeah, it's the first side.
We're just going to vomit the best stuff right out here now. So.
Interesting note about this album, but not by Rush. Carl, you sent me that message today.
Oh yes.
Yeah. Now, since I brought it up, I'll continue and steal your thunder, Carl.
That's fine.
Sit
I
down
don't
and
have the
shut
thunder.
up. Primus is going on tour and they're playing Farewell to Kings top to bottom. Apparently it was a tour that was supposed to happen pre-COVID. Well, in the time of COVID, but wasn't able to happen. So now that restrictions are getting lifted, everybody's getting their shots. We're going to see Primus.
Right, exactly.
Business trip.
That's Farewell to Kings put to bed. So I suppose it's entirely down to
Right,
to
time
Tom
to go,
now.
Steve.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, well, good night then.
It's down now to Tom to round out the quadrilogy, if we can call it that.
Quadrilogy, that's a good way to put it. While I would love to talk about hemispheres, and I could speak for hours about hemispheres and how it would be the most logical next step to go to, I'm going to talk about permanent waves.
Okay.
I think, to me, permanent waves, and I think maybe Neil might have said this, is in many ways their first album as Rush in what became their final form. They did sort of make radio friendly songs by their standards, and they worked. They worked really well. I mean, what can you say about Spirit of the Radio? We've all heard it. It's cemented in our heads like Whole Lot of Love or whatever, you know. But I can still remember the first time hearing that and going, did the drummer and the bass player make the exact same mistake over and over again at the beginning of the song? Like I was not prepared for that when I first heard that. Like that was nothing like anything I had ever heard. And I had heard Farewell to Kings before that album. So and it also was sort of like their handshake from being these classical literature storytellers to their own sort of lyrical style, Neil's sort of lyrical style. They went, you know, I think Jacob's Ladder, which I still love that song. I mean, it's lyrically, I would say it's probably one of their most basic sort of concepts, I guess, but still that build up in the middle is just, it's a song about a thunderstorm essentially, you know. But lyrically, it was sort of falling back into their hemispheres sort of thing. And I think it was like, let's do this last hurrah to this style. And then you go into Natural Science, which was, okay, this is how we're doing it now. Lyrics are scientific, they're nerdy, they're incredibly brilliant. They're not derivative of anything you've ever heard in your entire life, other than maybe your your biochemistry textbook. Once again, it was another brave step forward for them. They were like, all right, we can't just be like, we've already invented this form of prog, but now we can't be a parody of ourselves. We have to move on and move with the times. And it's also when they even admitted themselves, like, yeah, we're listening to the new music. We're listening to, I think I heard Neil say Ultravox. They had their antennas up for what the new wave was coming, and they liked it. You know, they were on board. They started entertaining that sort of the reggae hooks that they were using with the middle vamp in Spirit of the Radio, and it, obviously made its way into their style in many ways. But it's a very transitory album in my world. And of course, it had two of their first, what I think were in radio friendly songs, at least for US, since Working Man. Spirit of Radio is like a, hey, play me on the radio song. But it's still smart and still riffy and amazing. And then you have Free Will that made its way onto the radio waves. And once again, lyrically, how deep is that song? Geez, it's about existential choice with this radical bass solo in the middle. And it's almost like a pop prog song, which I guess you could argue that they might have invented, if there was ever a thing, poppy prog, which I want to change my name to, by the way. Poppy prog. Yeah.
When Tom has grandkids, that's what they'll call him.
Somebody help me.
I'm
trapped in a weird band.
Call the police.
I'm not the weird one. They are.
You keep telling yourself that, Ace.
Poppy prog. You're getting a name tag.
Hello, my name is. But I'm sure you all have your opinions of this wonderful breakthrough album that's way better than 2112.
If I had one thing to say about this, it was another one of these albums which shows just exactly what an iconic guitarist Alex Lifeson is.
Yeah.
And I think that as we all spoke about in the previous episode, that in a lot of ways, Alex transformed himself as a musician several times over during their career. And to be that kind of musical chameleon, it's a rarity in any genre of music, let alone just progressive rock.
Take the guitar part from beginning to end of Free Will. If you just put that in a bubble and put anything from the first 2 albums in a bubble and said, that's the same guitar player, nobody believed it.
Yeah. A little over a decade's time period.
Yeah,
You know,
not even 6
that's
years.
crazy.
Yeah.
You know, you talk about the the dynamic of the 1-2 punch, Spirit of Radio, Free Will.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I mean,
really.
yeah.
I mean, you know,
Two classics right
Almost
there.
doesn't matter what happens after that.
right? Right? Like
stuff did
you got
happen, but still.
you got your value. Your value was there in the
Exactly.
first 2 tracks.
Yeah, you've got the record. Worth it. Okay.
Yeah.
I think Permanent Waves is maybe my least listened to Rush album. Not that I don't love it, I just don't get to it. I'm sitting here realizing now it may have been decades since I've actually sat down and listened to Permanent Waves. I know every song in it by heart.
I was going to say, yeah.
I've played many of them. My band in college was called Different Strings. I just actually did Different Strings at a solo gig 2 weeks ago, which was spontaneous. But I haven't sat down and listened to it. But there's so much incredible stuff. Entre Nous, it's like lyrically, it's such a simple idea, but such a beautiful song, and the cool chord inversions that he puts in the verses of that. You know, all the chords in the verses of that, if you listen to it, it sounds bizarre. I think it's D, G, and E.
Really?
There are all these crazy inversions with a third in the root. And Geddy is playing the thirds as they're almost not playing the roots of the chords. So it gives it a really weird sound. So that is one of those things where I learned from that of saying, okay, well, I can take super plain chords and just flip them around a little bit and accentuate different parts of them and make the song seem like so much more.
Yeah. And that also lends itself to like sort of the funhouse floor that Rush had with their sort of rhythmic foundation. You know, you hear changes that, you know, the average listener says seem fairly, you know, normal, but then as a musician, you listen, you're like, that's not right. Wait, but that's great.
What are you doing there?
It's throwing me off, you know?
Yep.
There is another thing which I think this album is unique for in a lot of ways, because for me personally, I think this is the very first time that I realized as a fan and as a person that was growing into the idea of wanting to become a musician, that you could compose a drum line, that you could actually put something together. And I'm using the final track, what was it called?
Natural Science.
Natural Science, as a classic example of that, because that's a composed drum piece.
Yeah.
From beginning to
fills.
end. Yeah, and I'm not saying that it didn't happen beforehand. It's just that was the album, and that track in particular, where the penny dropped that he wasn't just riffing,
jamming through
he
it.
was writing that drum part.
Yeah.
That was as integral to the rest of the song as anything else.
Another great example of his composing is the drum part during the ending jam in Jacob's Ladder, the do 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 do, like just the way he I forget how he does it, but he does that ride cymbal that is so difficult to keep going with the kick and the snare, but it's the ding 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 while he's doing what is it, a 6 and a 7, but yeah, he's just doing the straight hit.
He's playing quarter notes with the ride, so it goes on and off.
Yeah, it is just so amazing. Like just that you can pick up like something that lends itself to the development of the song in such a, you know, something simple as a ride cymbal can change the entire mood, the progression of the song.
And also, can I just say that this is also the beginning of the change of Geddy's sound to a more rounded sound from those days when he was like total clack, if you know what I mean. Sort of like, you know, that Rickenbacker clack.
Yeah. Is that when he switched to the jazz bass for the recording?
Yeah, it might be.
Yeah, it is actually. Yeah, on that and Moving Pictures.
Moving Pictures, yeah.
Really leaning on the jazz. Yeah.
Okay, gents, thank you very much for your thoughts on those 4 albums. It is much appreciated, and I know to other people that have said this because we left Grace Under Pressure off of our last one. We'll be coming back to certain albums, I would suspect, in the future. So if you're wondering why we're not talking about Moving Pictures or Fly By Night, or even the first album, we will get back to doing some of these albums in more depth at some point later on, should you request it. But for now, I'd like to say thanks very much for sticking around to the end. We really appreciate it. Again, if you like what you see, please consider liking and subscribing and pressing the and clicking on the thumbs up button. And we will see you around very, very soon. So from me, this is Simon saying goodbye. Tom?
Good night, everybody. Thank you for listening. I hope you found it interesting.
Carl?
What?
And Scott.
Toodles.
We'll see you guys later. Take care.
Good night, all.
Good night.